Hey guys, Jensen here once again, and this is the second part of my two-part video series on how to review games. In the first part, we covered how to categorize the review points and kind of prioritize to determine what are the big review points that you might want to cover when you're reviewing a scrim. And in this video, we will be covering how exactly does one approach the exact review of said point, right? And this is the classic, right? Captain Hindsight. We should have done this instead. Very prescriptive. Tells the players that there's a particular solution, and they should have done that instead. And this is a very form of it's a very passive form of learning, where you're just telling them that this is the solution and hoping that they are able to pick up on the patterns on their own to be able to make the right decision in the future. And making the right decision is the keywords over here, because as coaches, what we're trying to do is establish systems and structures that enable our players to be able to make the right decisions when they are in the pressure of the game itself. Now, there's a little bit more on that later, but for now, there's four big types of review points that I have, right? The first is information gathering, which deals with what is the type of communication that's being given to the player or the team, what is the type of information that's being tracked. The second is information processing, is what do we do with this information? What is the overall approach towards making a decision for the team? And the third one is decision making. It's very simple. Do we make the right decision? Sometimes, given the pressure of the game, and in fact, it's quite often that you end up with this being a review point where the players know what they're supposed to be doing. They have all the right information, but they still make the wrong decision anyways because of pressure, because of bad habits, and the like. And the fourth one is execution, which I tend to call it the hit your spells, press your buttons kind of scenario. And sometimes you're looking at very specific mechanics such as comboing certain spells together, right? And of these four types of review points, it's important to distinguish from them because they have different takeaways and different approaches towards reviewing each of them. Now, to give us a better understanding of these four types of review points, let's bring back the game from our first part, where you had this 33 million long game that lasted that had about 19 review points from this. We would rate them in this scenario, but for the purposes of this exercise, I'm just going to be reviewing 3 points and walking through these 3 points with you guys to give you guys a better idea of how one can approach a scrim review. Now let's take a look at the first one here. There's an error on diving bot lane here. Now the execution level one is there's the hit your spells, press your buttons portion of it, which is letting the time change queue. We can talk a little bit about it, and this is where the classic, oh, why didn't you flash here? Why do you flash here? Kind of concept comes into play, and that doesn't mean that execution is always going to be irrelevant because there's always going to be some concepts such as juggling turret aggro, which can come into play over here as well. But what we always try to look at is the information gathering part of it, right? And in this scenario, there's two elements of it. There's the viability element, such as does the opponent have flashes? Does the mid lane and top laner have TP? And do we hashtag do the math in figuring out that we have the ability to burst down the opponents and make it a successful dive between the Varus, the Tahm and the Olaf, right? And then there's the opportunity aspect of the information gathering, which would then factor in what are the camp respawns and what's the wave statuses in the bot lane for us to determine if this is a good decision for us to go for a dive on the bot lane itself. Now, the information processing stage is once we are able to determine, okay, does the opponents don't have flash, the opponent top laner doesn't have TP, and yes, they are at about 60%, so we do have the ability to burst them, but the camps are respawning, and this is not a fully stacked wave, right? Then you can kind of determine from here that as we are playing a Drake second composition with Olaf, using this crashing wave to go for the Drake with the jungler's window is much more important. Now, the information processing is always you always want to boil it down into very simple shorthand strokes, right? What I described over there was an equation of sorts where things have to add up and things have to fall into place. But if you can boil it down to simple shorthands, like this is a Drake second composition, so with the jungle window, we always want to be going for the Drakes instead, or we should prioritize going for the Drakes instead. This is the general idea of how you want to boil down the information processing step into a simple line that people can keep track of rather than the complicated, okay, we can dive bot, but there's all these options over here and entertain all the various hypotheticals around that. Now, the decision-making step, once again, is a very simple thing. So if the players acknowledge that, yes, this is a Drake second composition, we didn't really have the ability to dive to open on the bot lane, but we still went for the dive anyways, then it's as simple as asking, okay, does the logic add up? Did we make the right decision here? And sometimes it's just a question of looking at the dive a second time and then letting the player say, oh yeah, we knew this, but we just made the wrong choice in game itself. Now, let's move on to a sample of how the exact review can happen in game. Now, this is the dive on the bot lane, and in this case, C stands for the coach. He starts by asking a series of guiding questions. What was the thought process here? To which the Ryze player replies, the plan was to Herald top. I thought I could get one wave bot and then shift over. And once again, asking the guiding questions, do you note that the opponents can be there? To which the player replies, not sure, Seth was last seen top, but he has TP, I thought Diana would be clearing her camps. Right? And then this reveals the key assumption that's happening in the game at this point of time. That he assumed that Diana would be clearing her camps, and therefore he thought that the Diana would be trying to play as optimally as possible, and he would have the time to clear the wave. Now, this enables us to explore things, right? So what was missing over here? The information gathering step. We didn't gather the right amount of information, and then we can talk about the quick fixes in this scenario so that we can get a better read on the scenario for the Ryze to be able to optimize this scenario accordingly. Because of course, if he is able to sneak the wave on the bottom side of the map, it lets the team get a hit one wave on the map, and it's very advantageous for the team. So if you buy a radar of base and put it on the blue ram bush, it will then be able to spot the Diana walking into your side of the jungle, and it will help you with this decision, whether you are going to commit towards defending and maybe even trading your life for the wave on the bot lane, or if you have to just go mid and sacrifice the wave bot instead. Of course, factors like how big the wave in is going to factor into this as well, but let's not overcomplicate things over here. Now let's compare this to how this situation is going to look like, right? And a very typical review. Okay, the plan is to go top here. You're on the weak side bot lane as Ryze. A very prescriptive language being used here. You can't get this wave, being telling the player directly. To which, if the player agrees with the general statement, it's a very classic response. Yeah, I'm trolling here. My bad, right? And then it's just left as that. There's no learning. There's no sense of optimization being done over here to help them figure out, okay, what are the various factors that we need to consider that we can look at in order for us to make the best possible decision in this scenario. So more on the information processing stage, one of the things that we have to understand is how our brains work, right? When we are in review, we are in logic mode. What we're trying to do is we're trying to figure out the steps, we're trying to do the math, we're trying to figure out the equations to to then determine if a particular course of action is the right one or the wrong one. And as compared to heuristics, which is what we end up using in the game, is very quick associations that we're doing. So logic tends to be slow. It requires a high amount of effort as well because you need to sit down, figure out all the details, and it's very reasoning based. But this we usually end up at a high level of accuracy in terms of figuring out what is the correct course of action. Whereas heuristics is what your brain calls what people call thinking fast, right? Where you make snap decisions on the fly. What you're looking for is particular trigger points, and this is very association based. So what you want to be doing in your review time is to transform this logical processing into broad strokes that allows you to have quick associative heuristics in game. Now, how can this be done? Now let's take a look at the third example over here, 920, where we have a decision now, right? Do we go for Rift Herald or do we defend the bot lane dive? Right, once again, this is really bad for bot lane. What can we do here instead? Starts off with a question that explores possibilities, because in this case, we aren't sure. We aren't sure what the solution is. There is no definite answer over here. But what we're trying to do, once again, is establish some broad strokes at the end of the day, and let's see how this conversation goes. The AD carry in this case says, I have 2 waves second here, I can't miss this wave. And this is where the sticks and the dynamic is set up, right? And the jungler says, but if I don't get Herald here, our opponents will get it. No, this is where you need to be able to identify what is the crux of the decision, right? Is how important is Herald in this game, and then the players can continue to debate it out. They can look at the scenarios. You can pin some hypotheticals as well within this, and they can discuss this further and further, right? If we give it, it'll be hard to be proactive for the next 3 minutes. Our top laner got dove at 4 minutes. They can possibly use this to break the top lane. This our top lane, they're able to defend that, and they can figure out all these type of things. But at the end of the day, what you want to figure out is if you can boil it back down into a key set of broad strokes, right? Because there's going to be compositions where the correct play here will be to go for the Rift Herald because it is key to accelerating the pace of the game. But in this particular game with the Olaf composition, what we have is a Drake stacking composition, and it is more important that we protect our bot lane than go for Herald. And this is a type of shorthand notation that can be used to help players out in terms of making the right decision in the future. So that pretty much sums it up. MSI will be starting at 6 May, and I'll be releasing video content on the daily basis. So this is kind of a lead up to it. I'm going to be previewing the teams, looking at how the teams play styles and what the matchups are going to be looking like. If you enjoyed this type of content and are looking forward to my MSI coverage, please do like this video and consider subscribing to my YouTube channel. This is Jensen, and I hope you've had a nice day.